Okay, so I'm going to talk relatively fast because I have a lot to get through. I'm talking about growing consultancies in the digital age, which is the topic of my most recent book, but I'm specifically going to focus on digital. The book is based on 82 interviews with founders that started their consultancy and then grew it and then sold it. So by all definitions, relatively successful. Typically, they've done that in the last 5 years, and they tended to grow and sell in 15 years or less, which is fairly good going. I've spent 15 years advising small consultancies on growth, and I'm an ex-consultant of many persuasions. I've had my own consultancy. I've sold my own firm. I've been a corporate consultant, an internal consultant, and I am now an independent consultant advising small firms, as well as a professor at Cardiff. Now, I'm going to focus specifically on the digital aspects of this. Now, the book contains all the advice that you need in terms of growing a firm, everything from marketing, business operations, preparing for a sale, managing people, etc., etc. But I thought I'd focus specifically on digital because it's a topic that we hear a lot about, but I haven't seen anyone really sort of lay out how it's transforming the consulting industry. Now, I could quite easily write another book on this, so I've focused on 4 specific things that I'm going to talk about. How digital is changing business models, how it's changing the services that consultancies offer, how it's changing the back office operations of consultancy, and how it is changing marketing. Now, I could talk about a whole load of other things. I could talk about sort of, the platforms that consultancies or consultants are now putting themselves on, almost like an Uber of consultancy. I can talk about the markets of consultancy. One of the interesting facts I came across is that out of the 30 fastest growing consultancies, only 1 is not focused on digital markets. But all this stuff about markets and platforms probably is less relevant to you. So I'm going to focus on these 5 things that are 4 things, sorry, that I think might be more interesting to you. So let's kick off with business models. 2 of my, Digitopia is one of my clients. Reinvigoration is a firm that I've been involved with for some time in various aspects. Now, this I want to start off as an example in terms of transforming business models. Digitopia is a digital maturity consultancy, so they have been helping their clients become more digitally enabled. Reinvigoration is an operations management consultancy that helps with process and innovation in a variety of different firms. Now, Digitopia has in the last year transformed its offering into a platform model. So instead of going into individual companies and offering tailored advice on how and what they should be doing, what they've done instead is use the data that they have already got access to through this work to build a platform that does benchmarking. And this now accounts for the majority of their work and has opened up all types of different offerings around the world and has enabled them to scale, but also to scale more profitably. Reinvigoration, again, fairly traditional ops management, small consultancy. They started off doing some online courses, so that they created some online videos to help their clients. And then increasingly people coming to them and saying, look, we've heard great things about these videos. Can we pay you to get access to them? So it's become a major revenue stream. And now they're moving into SaaS products. For those of you that don't know, SaaS is software as a service. So it's sort of software in the cloud. And both of these, and I'll talk a lot more about this, both of these are very good examples of successful transformations of fairly traditional consultancies into much more profitable, much faster growing, and much more powerful organizations. And the market recognizes this. So I realize many of you will be quite far from selling your firm if ever you actually want to. But when consultancies are sold, typically you'll get an average of EBITDA. So EBITDA is earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. If you are a platform or a software as a service business, you will typically get 15 times EBITDA. So your valuation will be double that of consultancies, give or take. Now, this is quite important because if you're a traditional consultancy, you can increase the value of your firm, and this is a very approximate average. But for every 10% increase in revenue from sort of digital products, sort of annualized, commodified, subscription-based intellectual property, you get an 8% increase in the multiple of EBITDA that is paid for your firm when you eventually sell it. So strategically, I mean, just in terms of valuation, this is something that you could be looking at. There's lots of other good reasons to look at different business models. One is that your competitors will be doing so. And in some ways, if you are not looking at digital services, digital business models, digital marketing, etc., in a few years' time, you're going to be left behind and be much less competitive than your competitors. So I talked quite quickly about sort of digital business models, and I wanted to give an example of how this works, and I can use Digitopia as a consulting analogy for this. But if you imagine something like the Encyclopedia Britannica as a traditional business product that is sold, it's a paper. It's you buy it as an individual. There's huge amounts of cost involved in producing it. Now, the digital version of that is Britannica.com, and the Encyclopedia Britannica attempted to go digital quite late, and by the time they did so, they were being superseded by lots of other websites. They still produce very high quality, but their profits have collapsed over the last 10 years for very obvious reasons. Now, a platform version of this. So when I'm talking about platforms, I'm talking about providing a platform, providing so it's a consultancy providing a place where you're bringing together third parties to create value. So if we look at these examples of platforms, YouTube, Wikipedia, Amazon, Udemy, these are all examples of places that are owned by the organization, but actually the content or goods or information is produced by other people. And in effect, these platforms bring together buyers and sellers, or viewers and content creators, or sellers of products and buyers of products. The platform simply sits in the middle, and it's a highly profitable business model. Now, this has always existed. Anyone that has done benchmarking work, for example, will have seen the potential of platform or digital models. But it's incredibly powerful because once the platform is there, if it's successful, you're not responsible for creating content. You're not responsible for bringing buyers to it. You're just providing an intermediary service. So it's very different from the traditional consulting model. But I'm not saying, of course, that all consultancies need to move towards this. I'm saying that there's a variety of options out there, and that many consultancies are thinking about these. But I would encourage you to think widely about what your business model is. So there's a whole load of successful models out there in terms of platforms or digital products or franchises or whatever. The traditional consulting model has, a lot of people say it's under attack. I'm not sure that's the right way of viewing it. I think because digital has become so cheap over the last few years, over the last 10 years specifically, many of the apps and products and services that you can now get for $20 a month would have cost you thousands of dollars a month at a minimum 20 years ago, if they existed at all. So I would encourage you with your business model to think quite seriously and quite deeply about alternative ways of adding value both to you and to your clients. And very often firms don't realize the information, the value, the experience that they have can be packaged up and sold in different ways. And we'll talk more about that in the next section. Now, by the way, any questions on this? I do realize I'm talking fast, so any questions on this, do please put them in the chat. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about services and consultancies. Most of the consultancies I've studied, now not all of the consultancies I studied did all of these things, of course, but again, it's thinking about how you can add value to the client, but also increase your profitability. Because if you're selling bodies, number one, bodies are quite expensive. And the more expert these bodies are, let's call them brains instead of bodies, a bit more flattering. The more experienced they are and the better skilled they are, the more expensive they're going to be. Now, obviously, if you're providing an app or some software or online courses, or any number of things, the great thing is that very often you create this thing once and then you can sell it indefinitely and it takes no time. So it's the archetype of passive income. Now, I'm slightly skeptical about the whole passive income idea because I've never seen someone who is particularly passive when they're creating passive income products. But there is no doubt in my mind that it is a very easy, not easy, it's a relatively easy way to create additional value to a consultancy. And these are the most common things that I've seen. So number one is online courses. So anyone that's a consultant is an expert in a specific area. If you're not an expert in a specific area, you probably shouldn't be a consultant. If you can package some of the more generic advice that you give your clients, or package some of the training that you might give your clients, or some of the insights that you've had into courses, then it provides you with an existing asset that takes the value out of your head and puts it in the firm. Now, when you're a buyer of a firm, any form of IP like these things is really important because they're terrified about being over dependent on the founders. And founders very often, they'll either leave the business, they'll leave. They don't like working for someone else, so the firm will get bought and they'll walk out and start up another firm when they're allowed to. Or they could get hit by a bus, they could get ill, they could retire, whatever. And so buyers are slightly nervous about dependencies on the senior team, especially. Now, there's lots of things you can do sort of that don't involve digital in terms of systems and processes and templates. We'll talk more about this later. But these things are ways of monetizing the expertise in the firm without necessarily having to sell the bodies or brains that are associated with it. Benchmarking is particularly powerful because everyone, and this is the go-to for most of the strategy firms, most clients are interested in how they are doing. I happened upon this quite early in my journey when I really, as a piece of academic research that I was doing, I was looking at innovation in the consulting industry. I got all this data back from surveys, and I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice to create a tool for people to measure how innovative they were? So I paid a few MBA students to knock up a tool that automatically created a report from a questionnaire that people would fill out. And the report, in effect, did a benchmarking exercise for these people. And I really did that not out of the goodness of my heart. As an academic, I'm praised for or rewarded for any form of impact that I have on the real world. But what followed from this was a vast amount of people following up with me saying, look, I've just taken your benchmarking survey. I found that I score in the bottom 40%. How do I get into the top 80%? Can you help us? And my answer, sadly, at the time was no, because I was busy doing other things. But it probably if I'd taken advantage of it, it could have quite easily generated over £200,000-300,000 worth of work for me. And actually creating that benchmarking tool, and again, a lot of this stuff can be outsourced. So one of the benefits of the digital world is that I do this a vast amount. Rather than, I'm building a piece of software at the moment. If I'd done it myself, it would have taken 2 years and been pretty awful. If I got in a British digital development company, it would have cost me, I don't know, 70 to 100,000. I'm using a Polish company to do it. They're building it from scratch. They're doing the back end and front end, and it's going to cost me about 10,000. The value of this software is yet to be seen, but the fact that these things are so cheap to do now, there's white label benchmarking out there. There's low code and no code solutions, so that you don't need to be an expert in software to build software. And there's a whole load of data aggregation and data visualization tools that are out there for you to use. So again, I don't want to go into this in too much detail, but there's a huge array of relatively affordable options for any consultancy that has been collecting data on its clients or data of interest to its clients. And I would really encourage you to open your files and look with every project that you have done. There is probably going to be data associated with it. You know, how much did it cost? How long did it take? What were the main causes of failure? What was the client feedback and what that correlated to? That will be of real interest to your clients. And so certainly if you've been doing things for a few years, you're going to have some data that will be interesting to your clients. And I would encourage you to make the most of it. And, you know, as I say, it's relatively cheap to do so. Now, it's all very well having these services, but you've also got to deliver them. And this is another way in which digital has helped transform service and service delivery. I created this diagram for my book. Really, I sketched it out for a client of mine who was talking about, well, you know, how do I understand how to model my team if they're using digital assets? So let me explain this diagram a little bit. So you've got your clients at the top. Underneath that, you've got 3 teams, and each of those teams is comprised of different types of consultants who are represented by the different colors. So you've got your client-facing teams, and then you've got your back-end assets. And this might not necessarily be digital. It could yes, be software. It could be a platform. It could be some online resources. It could be a load of templates that you use. But it also could be fairly traditional consulting assets, you know, sort of information, knowledge, expertise, case studies, etc. But the important thing is that these days, as you can see from the far left of the diagram, you can integrate with other third-party platforms that can offer your clients value. And the idea behind this is that your client-facing teams should be skilled and experienced and able enough to draw on different apps, software, methods, information, visualization, etc., as they see fit. And there's no reason these days why this needs to be proprietary to you. There's a huge amount of third-party software out there that will be incredibly useful, you know, ranging from simple stuff that improves your PowerPoint presentations all the way through to doing data analytics and crunching data intelligently for your clients. So in terms of service delivery, the thing that I have been seeing in the most successful firms was a digital influence on the method and process which is used. There's a great company called Method Grid, which was set up by Don Morehouse a couple of years ago. And what Method Grid does is provide a software solution for your tools, templates, methods, and processes inside the organization, and allow those to be shared and changed and modified by your consultants. Obviously, communications, the impact of digital on communications doesn't need an introduction from me. But one thing I would emphasize is that the skills that are required of consultants are changing. So certainly with the large firms and increasingly with the smaller firms, if you have expertise in something as simple as, you know, Python, for example, it allows you to create solutions for clients and add value to clients relatively quickly. So if you have someone in your firm that understands Python or Java or whatever, even data analytics, data aggregation, data mining, etc. Within a day, you can knock up a sort of draft of an app or a database or a web app or whatever that could be quite useful to your client. And this is something that traditionally these teams were split. You had your consulting teams and you had your IT teams. What I'm increasingly seeing is quite skilled consultants who don't just have the interpersonal skills and the management expertise, but they also have the IT skills as well. The other thing I would say is to think very seriously about the user experience, that is UX at the bottom. So the user experience is quite crucial. So it's one thing to say we've got digital product that we give to our clients, and we add value to our clients. But the other thing to think about is their experience of you, and it's worth doing sort of mapping end-to-end journeys of the client experience with you. And obviously, digital can help with this in all types of ways, because when you're throwing, it's quite easy to end up throwing disparate apps, solutions, software, etc., at your clients, and it becomes quite a jumbled experience for them. And you want the experience, as ever, to be quite seamless, quite professional, and in fitting with your values and brand. Okay, we're going to have lots of time for questions. I am going through this quite quickly. Now we're going to talk about the back-end operations and the impact of digital on that. And my research showed that, we talk about digital operations. Email is part of digital operations, and it's something that every consultancy uses, of course. What I found is that this is a decreasing arrow. Obviously, everyone uses email. Many people use management tools such as Trello or Asana or something like that. 50% of the small consultancies I looked at use some form of accounting software. In fact, I think it was actually 65% use accounting software. 45% use some form of client relationship management, CRM. And only, I think it was 40% use some form of professional service automation. Now, on this list, quite a few of you might be thinking, okay, so I obviously know what email is, I know what Trello is, I've got Free Agent or QuickBooks, and I'm using HubSpot for my CRM. A lot of you might be thinking, well, what the hell's a PSA? Now, a PSA is the thing that does everything else other than your CRM and your accounting software. So it's professional service automation. Typically, what happens when firms get to about 15 to 25 people, they hit a big barrier. And that big barrier is that the founders can no longer manage everyone and all the information. They can't do the resourcing, they can't do the recruitment because the company's getting so big. They can't even do all the business development that's needed. So systems need to get more professional. So in effect, you are systematizing what was previously in the head of the partners or the founders, depending on what type of organization it is, possibly both. PSA is brilliant at doing this. So a professional service automation, most consultancies have, in fact, most professional service firms have about 7 core processes. These are, recruiting people, resourcing projects, managing project delivery, getting the project in the first place, sort of the marketing side of things, and then the payment processes, and then sort of back-end billing and performance management. Now, this is a diagram from Kimball. Kimball is a PSA provider. I quite like it because it provides a fairly clear overview of what the major processes are in any professional service organization, whether you're a private dentist, an architect, a consultant, advertising firm, you're going to have these kind of processes. Now, PSAs do this. Now, PSAs have only really been in existence for about 10 years. Actually, it's around 20 years, but for the first 10 years of that, they were really expensive and fairly clunky. They're quite similar to the ERP systems of old, but they're simpler and more tailored to professional service organizations. Now, there's a whole load of work that's come out recently from SPI that have shown that PSAs are correlated with higher revenue growth, increasing revenue from new clients, and higher revenue per project. Now, I would say that some organizations do implement PSAs when they've only got 5 people, and that's fine because they want to start doing the best practice early. The good thing about most PSAs is that you can turn off and on functionality, so that obviously as you grow, there's going to be some things that you want to measure, some things that you want to standardize, some process you want to use. But when you're quite small, you're not going to need that because it's kind of overkill. But you can turn it on and off functionality. In terms, somebody asked me yesterday, actually, a client of mine asked me who I would recommend. What I have found is that all recommendations for PSAs come back and bite me on the backside. The reason for this is that it's very much beauty's in the eye of the beholder here. I used to recommend Avasa, and most people get on with it very well. It's relatively cheap. The customer service is excellent. But a few people have come back and said, I really don't know. I don't know how to use it. It's too confusing, etc. So I've created a short list of 5 PSA providers who not only I have seen work well in larger companies, but also get good reviews on the market. So if you're thinking of getting in a PSA, and if you're coming up to sort of 15 people, you should definitely be thinking about one of these. This is the shortlist that I would look at. Now, the key thing about PSAs, as with all form of technology, is that it's not going to do the job for you. You have to use it. It's like CRM systems. I give a lot of advice about digital marketing to consultancies, small consultancies. And I talk about CRM system, and they say, well, yes, we used HubSpot or we used MailChimp, and it didn't really work. And I said, well, show me how you used it. And they didn't really use it. They kind of just created a dump for all of their client emails and probably sent out 2 or 3 campaigns. They never measured how effective the campaigns were. They never followed up. They never assigned, different ratings to different customers. They didn't manage the pipeline well. So you're only going to get out what you put in. But if you do start using a PSA or a CRM system, and it's the same with, it's the same with your accounting software. I'm sure most of you are using Free Agent or QuickBooks or someone like that. If you're lazy with it, if you don't invest the time in getting how to use it, it's going to seem like more of a chore than anything else. But if upfront you put the time into working out, the details of invoicing and matching invoice payments with account entries, then it works and it saves you a huge amount of time, and it frees you up time to go and do the stuff that you should be doing, which is delivering client value and developing products that create better client value. Okay, so that was number 3, back office. Now, there are lots of other things with the back office that too boring to talk about, but there's lots of things that you can now do that you couldn't do before that can be automated for you. But I want to move on to one of the biggies, and that is marketing and the impact of digital on marketing. Now, this is from a piece of research by Hinge University that showed that high growth consultancies spend 25% more on digital marketing than their competitors. Now, my own view on this is that it's less about spend and it's more about thinking strategically. So I know quite small consultancies that don't spend much at all on marketing, but they've taken a very strategic evolutionary view, and they've said, well, okay, let's try this and we'll measure the results and we'll see what happens, and then we'll look at bang for buck, and then we'll try something else. And over a period of 2 or 3 years, they've landed on something that works, and then they fine-tuned it in terms of messaging to their clients and all the other things. So my own view is that if you are consistent, strategic, you measure and improve when it comes to digital marketing, that is much, much better than throwing a pile of money at it. Digital marketing is one of the easiest ways to burn through piles and piles of cash with relatively no success. And that's not because it is not immensely powerful, which I think it is, but it's simply because people think throwing money at it or doing something, I've got a podcast, I've got a YouTube channel, I've got a blog, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm posting here, I've developed, ebooks. Well, so what? I mean, it's not, those things in themselves aren't going to add any value to the company. What adds value is having a system, is having a logical, systematic architecture that manages the process for you. So let me talk through, this is my model of, I'm sure somebody else has done it in the past, but this is my model of marketing, and it would work for pretty much any professional services firm, whether you're an architect, a doctor, or a consultancy. Now, at the front, under defining, so you define who your market is, you define their needs, you define their wants, you define their pain points. Once you've got your ideal client and the messaging sorted, then you try and attract them. You go out to the market, you find prospects, you knock on doors in the old days. You turn up to conferences, you do talks, etc. Once you've got them, if they don't want to buy immediately, then you need to nurture them. You build the relationship, you build trust, you educate them about the problem, you educate them about your services, you convince them that, if it is true, you convince them that you are the best people you're the experts in this area and the best people to pay to solve these problems. And then once you've built the relationship, then you convert them. You get the call, you get the meeting, and you submit the proposal. Now, digital has completely transformed this for consultancies, every step of this process. Now, don't get me wrong, consultancy is still a relationship-based business. And relationships are primarily face-to-face, or even if that face-to-face is on Zoom. And it's very much, the old school traditional approach to consultancy, sort of walking the corridors, shaking the hands, having the coffee, going out to golf, or whatever you do. That's still really important. But digital, and especially digital in the COVID age, has transformed things. It's much harder to walk the corridors when you're not on client site. It's much harder to do the face-to-face and the dinners if there's restrictions on that. And clients have got used to not doing that, and consultants have got used to not doing that. In the larger consultancies, a lot of junior consultants aren't going to work for a firm where you have to be on the client site. They've got used to working at home and they want to persist that way. And in the war for talent, it's competitive advantage to offer consultants, those that want to, the ability to work from home. So things have changed, and you ignore digital at your peril, because clients haven't ignored digital. But with each step here, there are potential digital solutions or potential digital value adds. So when you're defining, I'm not going to talk through all of these in detail. Firstly, because many of them are obvious, but secondly, because I could be here for 3 days talking about this stuff. But when you're defining your client, who your client is, what are their pain points, then of course, bear in mind that all of this stuff that I've put here can be outsourced very cheaply. I have a virtual assistant in the Philippines. I have a software firm in the Ukraine. And I have a digital marketing specialist in the UK who I work with. And I've never met any of them face to face. And it works incredibly well. If ever any of you need recommendations, more than happy to make them. But at each step of this process, and this is the key process to running a successful consultancy, there is software that can help you. There are you can do automated analysis on groups. You can do keyword searches. You can look at what your competitors. This is all for define. This is all for the first step. You can look at what your competitors are doing, what keywords they're doing. You can even look at what pay-per-click ads they're doing. You can analyze your competitors' ads. You can see what they're writing about. You can do analyses of groups of clients, for example, on LinkedIn, etc., and look at what they're talking about. Even down to the specific person. If you find a specific buyer, you can see what their likes are. You can see what groups they're part of. You can see what they're posting about, what's important to them. It's quite incredible the amount of information you can find out, either about clients generically, but also clients specifically as an organization and clients specifically as an individual. When it comes to attracting people, there's even more opportunities out there. Obviously, the ability to create lead magnets. You can create a good-looking ebook for less than £100 using a service like Fiverr or Upwork. You can automate LinkedIn outreach, or you can just not automate it and simply do it well. You can buy email lists of specific groups. You can do SEO, search engine optimization, so that if a potential client does put something into a search engine that you're related to, that your site comes up. You can set Google alerts, so that if a client releases a press release about they're working with McKinsey on their marketing, the thing comes up, and this can be useful in terms of buying triggers. Many clients have buying triggers. You can do pay-per-click. Many consultancies do pay-per-click. They advertise on Facebook, etc. So there's the attract box. After the attract box, you've got the nurture box, so the building the relationship, And having a CRM system here is absolutely crucial. And again, CRM systems are relatively cheap these days. All of this stuff that I'm talking about for your average consultancy, setting it up, you're probably talking, it depends how big you are, of course, and you can spend as much money as you want. But, a lot of my clients, you can do this over a couple of years for, under 5 to 10 grand. And the impact it can have on your consultancy is remarkable. Then when you've done the nurturing, then you've got the conversion. There's a whole load of software that can help you with converting people. There's some great proposal management software. There's some good meeting management software. I use Calendly, etc., etc. So I don't want to go through everything in detail, but there's a lot of stuff. I'm going to give you 2 specific examples. I think many of you don't use LinkedIn strategically. With LinkedIn Sales Navigator, for example, you can in effect find very, very specific people. Find me all Deloitte alumni who are directors and have an interest in leadership development. Well, if you're ex-Deloitte and you have you're selling leadership development, this is a very important search engine. Perhaps you're not ex-Deloitte, perhaps you went to Oxford. I'm your Oxford educated CEOs whose companies have shrunk over the last year and who live in London. Find me all CMOs in French medium-sized manufacturing firms that have been in their role for less than 6 months and who have a team of between 10 and 100 people. I mean, this is incredible. This simply wasn't available, 10 years ago. It's incredible. And most people aren't using, most small consultancies aren't using this type of stuff. Now, LinkedIn Sales Navigator is relatively expensive. There are alternatives, and I'll talk about some of those now. So again, if you want to attract people, here are 3 things that I always recommend my clients to do. Number 1 is to find a student. Most students have access to the FAME database. FAME database is a list of all companies in the UK by size, sector, growth, headcount, etc. And if you wanted access to this by yourself, it would cost you 5,000 to $1 million, depending on how you wanted access to it. Really expensive. Most students have access to this free of charge. So I get my students to act as consultants to various companies. The first thing I do is say, look, use the FAME database. The second thing I would encourage, that's a student. The second thing I would encourage you to do is to use virtual assistants. They can be absolutely fantastic for finding emails. I'm very interested in doing podcasts with people that have recently sold their consultancies. I have a virtual assistant who goes through 3 or 4 sources for press releases on sales. She finds me the company. She finds me the name of the people that have sold the firm. She sends out an email to the people that have sold a firm, ask them to book a meeting. And it's only when they book a meeting that I get something in my diary popping up. And then all I have to do is introduce myself, do the podcast, and then once the podcast is recorded, she does the editing, the sound equalization, she adds in my logo, a little bit of intro music, she uploads it and writes some stuff around it. Saves me a huge amount of time and allows me to spend my time on the high value stuff. This isn't for everyone. There's a piece of software called Meet Alfred. This is automated LinkedIn outreach. What it can do many, many things. But what it can do is send out a personalized introduction. So, dear X, I hope all is well at Y. I note you're interested in leadership development in the manufacturing sector. Perhaps you'd like to read my ebook on this, whatever. And it automates that to up to 100 connections a week. And there's lots of pieces of software like this. This is really just an example. So I've kind of gone through this all very quickly. Each one of these topics I could talk about for 2 or 3 hours. So I've tried to cram in a fair bit. In summary, we have looked at how digital is changing business models in consultancy and also improving profitability and sale prices. We've looked at how services are being supplemented and transformed by the impact of digital. We have looked at how business operations, back office, are being transformed by professional service automation, again, relatively cheaply. PSAs can cost you anything from $5 to $10 a month. a person that's using them, so relatively cheap. And digital marketing, which I think is probably, for the smaller firm, it's probably getting that right is probably the biggest thing that you could look at. Okay, I hope that was useful. If there are any questions, do please put them in chat, and it doesn't need to be about digital. I realize a lot of you here might be thinking, well, I just want to know how to grow my firm. I've done lots of recordings on that are available on my website, which is joeomani.com. There's loads of resources there for people that want to grow their firm. They're all free. I'm not charging anyone for anything. So yes, look forward to answering your questions if I can.
That's great. Thank you, Joe. We do have a very wide audience with us today. So we have people from Wales, Leeds, and someone from Nigeria. So a very big audience for us.
Cool.
So our first question is from Janet, and she said she's been in consulting for 12 years and needs advice on how to transition to digital from face-to-face.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Janet. Hope all is well. Yes, this is a challenge that we've all faced. This can be answered in lots of different ways. So it could be answered in, feel free to clarify in the chat, but this could be about your digital presence. It could be about your digital marketing. I'm guessing the key problem for you is that you can no longer see your clients face to face, or they no longer want to see you face to face. So what to do? Obviously, you will probably have a website up. If not, you can get one up relatively cheaply, 500 quid. The key thing with your website is messaging. Most consultancies that I speak, or very small, sort of independent consultants, when they have a website and you go to it, it's all about them. It's all about, I've done this and I've done that, and this is why I'm the expert. And demonstrating your expertise is important, but it's not as important as the message, the pain points of your clients. So really getting inside the heads of your clients and getting that messaging right about what keeps them awake at night, what worries them, what are their big spends, what are their big value adds, and making sure, in that sort of quadrant of, expensive versus cheap and urgent versus not urgent, you're in the top right hand quadrant on the urgent and expensive stuff, the important stuff to the client, and getting all that messaging is right. Once you've done that, and I would say, one of the services I do is I do a review of people's websites. I'd say 8, maybe 4 times out of 5, people are scoring less than 60% on the quality of their website and their messaging and all of that. Once you've got that, if you imagine a relatively simple triangle between a lead magnet, which is something that will attract people to your website, and it might be an ebook, it might be a podcast, it might be a video you do on a very important topic to your clients, it might be an app, it might be a white paper, whatever. Produce that. Advertise it. You don't need to pay for the advertising. Put it on LinkedIn. Put it on, LinkedIn groups. Put it on, send it in wherever you can, and that should draw people to your website. And the third thing you need on your website is what I would call a gate. And there should be a gate before that person accesses that thing, and it puts their email in. Then they get access to it. And that needs to be quite high value content, because someone's exchanging a personal piece of information about them, which is an email, for their content. And that allows you to build an email database of people that are interested in the type of thing. They might not be ready to buy now, but they're going to be ready to buy at some point, or potentially ready to buy at some point. Maybe not from you, maybe for someone else, but certainly interested in that problem. I probably get 10 emails a day put into my website, and I don't do any paid advertising. I do talks, I do LinkedIn posts, I occasionally put something up. But I've now got, I think, 12 valuable sort of lead magnets that I can put out. And they're also useful. I can send to people who are interested. So getting that relationship between getting a lead magnet, getting it out there, and then getting people back to the website where they put their email in exchange. And then you've got the basics of a basic digital architecture. And you can improve that as you get more experience and get more money. I hope that helps.
That's great, thank you. So Bernice has asked, do you have any ideas on how to balance current employment with setting up a part-time consultancy?
Yeah, yeah. So it takes a long time. First of all, get your plan in place, and that plan should include the ability for you to potentially drop some of your employment with setting up a consultancy. This is what I've done over the last few years. I always aimed at kind of 3 days as a professor, 2 days advisory work, and eventually maybe next year that's going to be 2 days at the university and 2 days advisory work, and a day playing with my kids or playing golf or something. I don't play golf. I don't know why people say it, but so all the basics still apply. So don't think because you're part-time you get to skip some of this stuff. You don't. Getting your niche right, getting your strategy right. What do you want to achieve? What type of consultancy do you want to be? Being clear on who your clients are, getting your messaging right for your clients, and then getting the digital presence, the websites, the lead magnets, the infrastructure of your website right. All of the basics are absolutely crucial. You're just going to do them slower. But the key thing is to do something. And obviously the big thing is the revenue that you're getting in, which means that you need to be seen as what Hinge call a visible expert. And these days, the best way to do that, in my view, is the expertise. Everyone on this call is an expert. It's the visible that's the difficult thing. So doing one thing and doing it well in the digital marketing domain. I really worry about people that, they've got a podcast and they're doing lead magnets and they've got a blog and they're doing YouTube videos. Usually this means you're doing a lot of things badly. So I would recommend doing one thing very, very well. And if you're doing it part-time, you're going to be doing it slower, but it is absolutely crucial that you do the content and you're very clear about. So I always set Monday mornings aside for content production and dissemination. I'm supported in that work by a virtual assistant, so she takes a lot of the heavy lifting off. I just do the content creation. But doing that regularly, because it's quite easy, as you all know, to do one of those roles more than you should be doing. And so saying no to things that aren't crucial is going to be really important. So something I can talk about all day, but if you've got a bit more advice, drop me a line at joe@joeomani.com or joe@gmail or joeomani@gmail.com.
That's brilliant, thank you. So the next question is from Rula, and it's kind of two questions rolled into one. So what options are there to be an associate consultant? And to what extent do consultants need to be specialized to succeed?
Okay, so I'll answer the second one first. So to what extent people need to be specialized? If you're a solo consultant or a very small consultancy, it's absolutely crucial. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to start off specialized. If you imagine a funnel coming down, what typically happens when people start is they will do anything that they're getting paid for. Yeah. So your background might be leadership development or something, but you're going to do coaching, you're going to do change management, you might do culture change, you might do some leadership development, etc. So you're going to do a lot of stuff just to keep money and pay the mortgage. However, over the next 2 to 3 years, what you want to be doing is focusing down on a specific area that is very high value and in a very important to your clients. And this is really crucial to get right, because a lot of small consultancies start doing stuff simply on the basis of what they used to do when they were part of a bigger firm, or what they used to do when they were in a larger client organization. And that's the wrong way to think about things. You need, doing lean or doing process analysis in the public sector is roughly the same as doing lean in the finance sector. If you're doing lean in the finance sector, you're going to get 3 times the day rate than if you're doing process work in the NHS or public sector. So getting that niche is absolutely crucial. However, once you get to about 15 people, 20, 30 people, what typically you'll find is that your one service that you've focused down on that has allowed you to become a visible expert isn't enough to help you grow. So typically what firms do is then strategically build out aligned services, or the same service in different markets. That depends on the type of organization that you are and the type of market that you serve. But what you're doing here is building logically consistent and coherent services alongside your key niche or value proposition service. What you're not doing is doing anything that comes along. So number one, it's absolutely crucial that you do the niche thing, but then think strategically about building from that base once it's worked. In terms of your first question around associates, I'm not sure how much there's a huge amount of opportunity to work as an associate for others. Typically, though, you'll be getting a 50% of what they'll be getting. So bear in mind, associate work isn't so well paid. But you do it in the same way that you get clients. You network, you build relationships, you build trust, you talk to people that you've worked with before, and you ask for recommendations and testimonials. So, you just can't turn up at the firm and say, hey, can I be an associate with you? There's a process that you go to. Some small consultancies, well, in fact, one of my clients, her firm is 75% associates. So there's a huge market out there for associates, and especially now that skills are quite hard to come across. So there is a big market, but you've got to do the legwork still. It's not easy.
That's great, thank you. So we're moving on to audience questions. We are going to answer as many as we can. So this one is from Simon, and he said, what are the key behavioural drivers in growth in digital consultancies that you've seen, as surely these underpin all of the changes discussed?
Oh, Simon, that's a good question. Gosh. Yeah. Okay. Behavioural drivers. If I'm barking up the wrong tree, let me know. But I would say the biggest differentiator between a firm that is successful and a firm that's not is mindset. It's the mindset of the founders and leaders. And mindset needs to change as you grow. One of the big challenges of small firms is very small firms is founders who are, to coin a phrase, who are not spending enough time working on the business because they're too busy working in the business. So they're not thinking strategically about the business, where it's going, and this continuous improvement cycle. As you grow, actually the opposite problem appears, in that you get these founders, and I see this very often, who, this is my company, I've grown it from scratch, we're at 50 people and I can do everything. Well, no, you can't, because if you try and do everything when you've got 50 people, you're going to collapse under the weight of the mouth that you've got to feed, and everything's going to start being done badly. And what you have to do is to delegate, is to create systems and processes and structures that work. So I don't see the world as digital and real world anymore. Digital is just an extension of everything else. It enables everything else. The mindset, the strategy, the niche, this is all old school stuff that was still true 200 years ago. What has changed is the affordability, the functionality, and the value that can be created through various tools, digital tools. So I do think mindset is really important. I think the first chapter in my book is on sort of leadership mindset around that. Other things we can talk about this for a while. I'll try not to, because I realize you guys have got to go. But the other thing I've seen a lot with mindset is that balance between risk and ambition. Now, consultancy has grown. The consultancy market has grown year on year, every year, apart from last year, or 2020 to 21, for 100 years. It's a relatively safe market compared to any other market. It's relatively recession-proof. There's lots of reasons to take risks in order to pursue growth. And that's one problem I have seen, is people who don't want to employ people. They'd rather work with associates all the time. They don't want to build a company. They don't want to go after too big a project because they think they might fail. And especially if you've worked for a larger Big Four consultancy typically, and you're used to having the brand and the processes and the salespeople there for you, it can all be quite overwhelming. And simply because you're a good consultant doesn't mean that you're going to be a good consultancy owner. So it's all about, I would say it's all about mindset. I realize that's quite a brief answer to quite a powerful big question, but we don't have all the time in the world.
No. Speaking of time, we do only have a few minutes left, but I'm going to try and squeeze in Patrick's question. So Patrick is from Ghana, and he says, what do you suggest be the best way of putting together a very brilliant messaging in order to attract lots of clients? So again, this is a very big, broad question, but if you could give one tip,
sure.
What would it be?
Sure. Hi, Patrick. Nice to see you. Very nice bow tie you have on in the picture. This requires time and research. And most people think, I know what the client needs. And there's two clients. There's the organization that you typically deal with, but also there's the individual. And really taking time out to understand both of those. With the organization, obviously you can look at once you've decided, your target market, and that's the niche, then you need to talk to them. And this is one thing that consultants are very reluctant to do, is to go out and talk to their clients about, what are their pain points? How do they feel about them? What keeps them awake at night? What do they do? What do they see? What do they hear? What do they feel about these problems that you can help them with? And I always think that good messaging, you should be able to describe the client's problem better than they can. If you can do that, the client's going to trust you and see you as an expert. Well, not necessarily, but much more so than if you can't do that. Really getting inside your client's head. And once you've developed some propositions, some messaging, take it to past clients and say, does this resonate with you? Does this lead magnet that I've developed, is it attractive in dealing with that problem, in getting you interested in a potential conversation with me? So really, really getting in the mindset of the buyer. And bear in mind, the buyer is the most important person. The buyer isn't always the person that you're appealing to. So very often, the person who's actually signing the checks will be influenced by someone else, and sometimes you'll want to be targeting that influencer. And so once you've talked about the firm, and by all means look at McKinsey, look at the Slow Management Review, look at the Chartered Management magazine, and all the rest of it in terms of what are the big trends affecting this industry. So that's the firms, and then you've got the individuals. Do you have a type of individual that you need to appeal to? Because some love pictures, some love data, some are extroverts, some are introverts, some talk about relationships, some want numbers. So you need to think, and sometimes this can't be done because buyers can be any type, but sometimes there's a specific type of buyer that you want to appeal to. And sometimes it's an individual, if you're going for big ticket items, sometimes it's a specific individual. And then there's a different type of targeting. So I would say spending time getting your messaging right, getting the key themes. I do a workshop on this. If you can identify the 5 key themes that underpin all your marketing, all your messaging, all your website stuff, all your blog stuff, you're going to be doing well.